The first gunshot cracked through the evening air, and Harriet Taylor knew her life had just ended. Not because she had been hit, but because in Cottonwood Springs, Arizona territory, 1876. A woman who shot a rich man did not live long enough to explain why. Her boots slammed against the muddy main street as she ran, skirts gathered in trembling hands. Her chestnut hair had fallen loose, whipping behind her in the hot desert wind. People stared. Doors opened. Voices rose. "There she is!" "Stop her!" Sheriff Dawson's voice thundered over the chaos. $500 to the man who brings in that murdering woman. $500. More than most men in town would see in a year. Harriet's lungs burned. Her vision blurred. She tasted blood in the back of her throat. She could still feel Edwin Price's hands on her arms. Still hear his laugh in that dark storeroom. Still see the shock on his face when the gun went off. She had not meant to kill him. She had only meant to survive. The livery stable stood at the edge of town, wide doors half open, shadows spilling across the dirt like an invitation. It was the only place left to run. She dove inside. The scent of hay and horses filled her lungs. The world dimmed into cool darkness. She pressed herself against a stall, shaking, trying to breathe. Boots pounded past outside. Search every building. She couldn't have gotten far. Harriet's heart hammered so loudly she feared it would betray her. Then a voice came from the shadows. "Madam." Deep, calm, steady. She spun around. A tall man stepped forward from beside a stall. The brim of his worn hat shadowed his eyes, but the fading sunlight from a high window revealed a strong jaw and a 3-day beard. His hands rested loose at his sides, not reaching for a weapon yet, but ready. "Please," Harriet whispered, backing away. "They're coming for me." He studied her face, the terror, the tears she fought to hide. "Who's coming?" "Sheriff Dawson. His men. They think I murdered Edwin Price." The man's jaw tightened slightly. "You didn't." It was not a question. Harriet swallowed. "He tried to force himself on me. In the storeroom at the Mercantile. There was a pistol on the shelf. We struggled. It went off." The cowboy stepped past her toward the stable doors. He looked out through the narrow crack. Voices were closer now. He shut the doors quietly and slid a wooden beam into place. "My name's Thomas Jenkins," he said without turning. Most folks call me Tucker." Harriet stared at him, disbelief flooding her exhaustion. "You don't know me." He faced her then. His eyes were the color of a coming storm. "I know when someone's telling the truth." Shouts echoed outside. Someone rattled a nearby door. "They'll hang me," Harriet whispered. The words felt like iron around her throat. Tucker's hand moved slowly to his gun belt, not in panic, in decision. "Then I'll stand beside you till they don't dare." The world seemed to still. She had known this man less than a minute. "You'd risk your life for me?" He met her gaze without hesitation. "I've seen what passes for justice in this town. I won't watch it happen again." Outside, Boots approached the stable. "Check in there." Tucker moved quickly. Then he saddled a powerful chestnut gelding and a sturdy paint mare with practiced hands. "Can you ride?" he asked. "I grew up on a ranch in Texas." "Good." He handed her the reins. "Once we mount, ride hard. Don't look back. Stay behind me." "Why are you doing this?" she asked again, desperate to understand. His voice lowered. "Because 5 years ago, I watched a woman hang for defending herself. No one stood beside her." A heavy knock slammed against the stable door. "Open up!" Tucker unbarred the back door instead. "Now!" They led the horses into the narrow alley behind the stable. Harriet's hands trembled as Tucker lifted her into the saddle. He mounted in one smooth motion, A shout rang from the corner. "There they are!" Gunfire cracked. A bullet tore through the air near Harriet's ear. "Head for the trees!" Tucker called. They burst from the alley into open ground, hooves pounding, mud flying behind them. The forested foothills loomed ahead like salvation. More shots followed, but distance grew fast. Harriet leaned low over her horse's neck, heart pounding as fiercely as the animal beneath her. The wind ripped tears from her eyes. They hit the tree line at full speed. Branches whipped at her arms. The path narrowed into a steep mountain trail. Behind them, faint but steady, came the sound of pursuit. Tucker led them toward a rushing stream. Without slowing, they splashed into it, riding through the cold water to break their trail. After nearly a mile, he guided them up a rocky slope and into thick forest. Dusk painted the sky purple and gold as they finally stopped in a small clearing high above the valley. Harriet slid from her saddle, legs buckling. Tucker caught her. "You all right?" "I will be," she whispered. They built a small fire, hidden low between rocks. Horses were brushed down, saddles loosened. Across the flames, Harriet finally saw him clearly. Early 30s, weathered, scar at his brow, eyes that carried both regret and resolve. "You risked everything," she said softly. He handed her a tin cup of coffee. Sometimes strangers are the only ones worth risking for. Silence settled around them. The mountains stood tall and indifferent. "They'll hunt us," Harriet murmured. "They might," Tucker agreed. "And if they catch us?" He looked at her through the flicker of firelight. "They won't." Harriet studied him, trying to understand the man who had tied his fate to hers in a single breath. You don't know what you've stepped into," she said quietly. Tucker leaned back against a tree, rifle resting across his knees. "I stepped into it the moment you said they'd hang you." The fire crackled, and I meant what I said. Harriet wrapped her hands around the warmth of her cup. For the first time since the gunshot, she was not alone. High above Cottonwood Springs, beneath a sky heavy with stars, a hunted woman and a cowboy, who refused to walk away, sat side by side. And somewhere in the darkness below, men gathered with ropes. Unaware that this time, someone had chosen to stand beside her. The night did not bring peace. It only brought silence, thick enough to hear every fear. Harriet lay on the bedroll Tucker had given her, staring up at the stars through the thin break in the trees. Sleep would not come. Every snap of a twig felt like a noose tightening. Every gust of wind sounded like boots in the dark. Across the small fire, Tucker sat awake, rifle resting across his knees. "You should sleep," she whispered. "I will," he answered, though he did not move. Harriet watched the flames reflect in his storm-gray eyes. He did not look like a man running. He looked like a man who had already made up his mind about something long before she appeared in that stable. "Tucker," she said quietly, "if they catch you with me, they'll hang you too." He did not look away from the trees. "Let them try." "You don't understand," she insisted, sitting up. "Clarence Price owns half that town. Sheriff Dawson answers to him. They won't care about truth." Now Tucker looked at her. "Well, I understand more than you think." The firelight carved shadows across his face. For a moment, he seemed older than his years. "I once watched a woman beg for mercy," he said. "She said her husband beat her near to death every week. When she finally fought back, they called her a monster." Harriet held her breath. "I knew she was telling the truth," he continued. "Everyone did. But we said nothing. We let the law do what it does when money is involved." "And they hanged her?" Harriet asked softly. Tucker nodded once. She said the same thing you did tonight. Harriet felt her throat close. They'll hang me. Silence stretched between them. I won't watch it happen again, Tucker finished. Something inside Harriet shifted then. Fear was still there, heavy and real. But beside it stood something else. Trust. The next morning dawned cold and sharp. They rode north, deeper into the mountains where trails vanished and only game paths remained. Tucker led with steady focus. He watched the ridgelines. He studied the dirt. He listened to the wind. By midday, they reached a narrow valley tucked between steep rock walls. A small stream ran through it, and against a stand of tall pines stood an old log cabin, weathered but strong. This will do, Tucker said. Harriet slid from her saddle, wincing as her sore muscles protested. 2 days of hard riding had left her weak, but she refused to show it. Tucker checked the cabin first, gun drawn. When he stepped back outside, he nodded. All clear. Inside, dust coated everything. The fireplace was stone and solid. One narrow cot leaned against the wall. A rough table stood in the center of the room. It's not much, Tucker said. It's safe, Harriet replied. They worked in silence for hours. Harriet swept. Tucker checked the roof and filled gaps in the walls with mud and straw. He secured the corral and watered the horses. By evening, smoke curled from the chimney. They sat across from each other at the small table, eating rabbit Tucker had snared. How long do we stay? Harriet asked. As long as it takes. For what? For the law outside Cottonwood Springs to catch up with the truth. She studied him carefully. And if it doesn't? Tucker met her gaze steadily. Then we find another place. Start over. The idea felt both terrifying and strange. She had run her whole life, first from loss, then from fear, now from injustice. Why are you still here? She asked suddenly. You could have left me at that stable. You could have saved yourself. Tucker leaned back in his chair. Because you looked at me like you had no one else in the world. The words struck her deeper than she expected. I don't, she admitted. The wind rose outside, brushing snow against the cabin walls. Tucker stood and added another log to the fire. You do now, he said quietly. The first snow fell 2 days later. Heavy flakes drifted down, blanketing the valley in white. The world grew smaller, quieter, and harder to leave. They settled into a rhythm. Tucker hunted. Harriet cooked and repaired what she could. They spoke in the evenings, low voices by firelight. One afternoon, a rifle cracked in the distance. Harriet dropped the basket she was carrying and ran toward the cabin, heart pounding. She found Tucker standing beside a fallen deer. That relief flooded her so sharply her knees trembled. I thought, she began. He stepped closer. You thought they'd found us. She did not deny it. Without thinking, he pulled her into his arms. You're safe, he murmured against her hair. The words undid her. Weeks of fear poured out in tears she had refused to shed. She clung to him, not caring that she barely knew him, not caring that the world beyond the mountains wanted her dead. When her sobs faded, she became aware of his hand still on her waist, of his breath warm against her cheek. She pulled back slowly. Tucker. He brushed a tear from her face. Harriet. Her name sounded different in his voice, softer. He gave her time to step away. She did not. His kiss was gentle, careful, as if asking permission. She answered by rising onto her toes. At the world beyond the valley vanished. There was no sheriff, no rope, no past, only warmth in the cold. When they finally parted, Tucker rested his forehead against hers. "I shouldn't," he whispered. "Why?" she asked. "Because I can't promise you anything." She gave a sad smile. "None of us can promise tomorrow." He searched her face. "And if spring comes and you're cleared, then we'll decide what comes next." A long moment passed. Then hooves sounded in the distance. Tucker moved instantly, pushing her behind him. Inside, a single rider appeared between the trees. It was a trapper, a friend of an old lawman Tucker trusted. He brought news. The territorial marshal had begun an investigation. Witnesses were speaking. Doubt was growing around the Price family. But winter would block the passes soon. "You'll be snowed in till spring," the trapper warned. Harriet looked at Tucker. Months. Alone. Cut off from the world. After the rider left, silence settled thick between them. "You're free to go," Harriet said quietly. "You don't owe me winter." Tucker stepped closer. "I chose to stand beside you." The snow began falling again. "And I don't walk away from what I choose." She looked up at him, heart full and afraid at once. "You know they're calling us lovers down there," she said softly. "They say we planned it together." Tucker gave a faint, humorless smile. "Then let them say it." The fire crackled between them. Outside, the world turned white. Inside, something stronger than fear took root. Love grew slowly in that small cabin, in shared meals, in quiet laughter, in hands brushing by accident, then not by accident. But by Christmas, they no longer slept apart. And one night, as snow fell heavy against the roof, Harriet whispered against his shoulder, "I love you." Tucker went still. "I never thought I'd hear those words and believe them," he said roughly. "Do you?" He kissed her hair. "God help me, Harriet Taylor. I do." For the first time since that gunshot shattered her life, Harriet felt something stronger than fear. Hope. And in the valley below, men still spoke of ropes. But in the mountains above, a cowboy had chosen to stand beside her, and he was not moving. "Wait, before we move on, what do you think about the story so far? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm really curious to know." Winter did not break them. It bound them together. The snow rose high against the cabin walls. The valley disappeared beneath white silence. The world outside shrank to wind and cold, and the narrow path Tucker kept cleared to the corral. Inside, the fire never died. Harriet learned to stretch flour into biscuits that lasted 3 days. Tucker smoked venison in the small shed behind the cabin. They rationed coffee like gold. They read by lamplight. They planned futures that felt both fragile and fierce. Sometimes at night, when the wind howled like something grieving in the dark, Harriet would wake with her heart racing. Tucker always felt it. He would pull her closer without words. "I'm here," he would murmur. And that was enough. January brought the deepest cold. February brought quiet doubt. "What if the marshal doesn't clear you?" Tucker asked one evening, staring into the flames. Harriet sat across from him, mending his shirt. "Then we build a life somewhere no one knows my name. And if they come here?" She set the needle down. "Then we face them together." He looked up at her then, really looked. "You don't regret this?" he asked. "Being here, with me." She crossed the room and took his hands. "I regret nothing that led me to you." Spring arrived slowly. First came dripping water from the roof. Then patches of earth broke through the snow. Then birds returned to the trees. One afternoon, as they were stacking firewood outside, the sound of bells echoed through the valley. Not wind, not imagination. Harness bells. Tucker grabbed his rifle. Harriet picked up the shotgun by the door. A sleigh appeared between the trees, drawn by 2 tired horses. 2 men sat on the bench. Tucker lowered his rifle first. It's Jacob," he said. The old lawman climbed stiffly from the sleigh once it stopped. "You 2 look like mountain ghosts," he said with a rough grin. Inside the cabin, coffee steamed between them as snow melted from boots. Jacob reached into his coat and pulled out folded papers. "The territorial marshal finished his investigation," he said plainly. Harriet's hands tightened in her lap. "And?" Jacob handed her the document. "You're cleared, Miss Taylor. Self-defense. Witnesses testified. The doctor confirmed signs of struggle." The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. Cleared. Free. Over. Tucker watched her, breath held. "It's done?" she whispered. "It's done," Jacob confirmed. Silence fell heavy and full. Then Jacob cleared his throat. "There's more." He handed Tucker a letter. From Denver." Tucker's brow furrowed as he opened it. His eyes moved quickly, then slowed. "My father passed," he said quietly. Harriet stepped beside him, taking his hand. "He left you the ranch," Jacob added, "near Fort Collins. Your sister's been running it with her husband. She wants you home." Tucker stared at the letter as if it might disappear. "My father and we weren't speaking. Seems he wanted to fix that before the end," Jacob said gently. The room grew still again. Harriet held her pardon in one hand. Tucker held his inheritance in the other. 2 pieces of paper. 2 futures. Jacob and the trapper stepped outside to give them space. Harriet looked at Tucker. "You're free too," she said softly. He shook his head. "I've been free since the day I chose you." Her breath caught. Tucker." He stepped closer. "You can go anywhere now. Start fresh. Forget all this. Forget me if you want." Her heart clenched. "Is that what you want?" "No." The word came firm and immediate. "I want you with me, on that ranch, as my wife." The fire popped behind them. "You're asking me?" she whispered. He swallowed. "In the only way I know how." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Tucker." He pulled her into his arms and kissed her like a man who had almost lost everything. Outside, snow melted from the trees. By late spring, the mountain passes opened. They packed slowly, carefully. The cabin that had sheltered their fear and grown their love stood quiet behind them. "Ready?" Tucker asked. Harriet looked around the valley one last time. "This place saved us," she said. "It did," he agreed. Then they rode down the trail side by side, no longer fugitives, no longer running. 5 years later, Fort Collins, Colorado Territory. The sun dipped low over wide grazing land. Horses moved like shadows across golden fields. Harriet Jenkins stood on the porch of a sturdy ranch house, one hand resting on the gentle curve of her belly. Inside, their 3-year-old son laughed as Margaret read him a story. Hoofbeats sounded in the distance. Harriet's heart lifted the way it always did. Tucker rode at the front of a small group, tall in the saddle, confident, steady. He dismounted and lifted his son into the air in one smooth motion. "There's my boy," he said, smiling wide. James laughed and clung to his father's neck. Harriet watched them with warmth in her chest that still surprised her sometimes. Tucker climbed the porch steps and wrapped an arm around her. "Miss me?" he asked softly. "Always," she answered. He kissed her gently. The years had not hardened him. If anything, they had softened him in all the right places. "How is town?" she asked. "Sold every horse," he said. "Orders for more in spring." Then his expression shifted slightly. "I heard something," he added. "Sheriff Dawson passed last month." Harriet felt the name like a distant echo, and nothing more. "That was another life," she said calmly. He nodded. "Yes, it was." She placed his hand over her belly. "This is our life." He covered her hand with his as, "I told you once I'd stand beside you," he said quietly, "and you did. And I will," he added, "until I don't dare to stop." Harriet leaned into him, and watching their son chase fireflies across the yard. Fields of horses stretched beyond them, and near the fence line, rows of flowers bloomed bright against the fading light. The world had once prepared a rope for her. Instead, it had given her a ranch, a husband who chose her, children who would never know fear the way she had. As the sun slipped below the horizon, Tucker pulled her closer. "I love you, Harriet Jenkins." She smiled up at him. "And I love you, Thomas Jenkins." He had stood beside her, not just until they didn't dare, but until the world itself no longer mattered. And he never moved.